All right.
There we go. Yep.
All right, everybody. I'd like to introduce fellow student, Jeffrey Gibson. Jeffrey Gibson is actually transmitting to us right now from lovely Kabul, Afghanistan. From my understanding, 10 years, and you loved it so much. So we are glad that you're here and that you're safe, and we've been really looking forward to listening to your lecture entitled Mass Post Vehicle Borne Improvised Explosive Nation Overview and Lessons Learned. Having been said, I have to mute me. My mouse seems to be locked up, so reach up into my box where you see my name, and then up around in the corner there's some little bitty, it'll like come up with some little bitty dots.
Yeah, I got it.
You can actually manually, and I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and mute you then. I have the chat box open too. So.
Yeah. Thanks. Because right now my cursor.
I think I muted you mid-conversation on that one.
Changes appearance to that.
No problem.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction. And like she said, I am currently sitting in Kabul. This presentation is going to be basically over mass casualty incidents that can be applied anywhere, but this one specifically to post-VB IEDs. The main reason I wanted to do this today is we had an incident here back in May that was one of the largest incidents in Kabul up to date, actually in Afghanistan up to date. Unfortunately, we had another incident not too long ago that produced about another 100 casualties, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So without further ado, we'll go into this. And first off, just a general disclaimer, this is going to be my opinion only. It's no way, shape, or form a release from the government or my employer, so just want to get that out there. And then all this information can be found open source, so there's no classified information in the brief. So this picture is actually the picture that they took right after they detonated the device. As you can see, it was the morning of May 31st, and we were up late that night. We had other things going on that night, so we were up until about 2 in the morning. And about 1 in the morning, we had a pretty good earthquake go off here, so it shook the ground pretty good. And the morning of, about 8:30, I'm sitting in bed, and when this thing went off, it felt like another earthquake at first. And that's the first thing I thought, oh, it's just a bigger earthquake. And then everything went boom. Stuff shot out of my bathroom, and knew instantly that, you know, bad things had just happened. So the incident overview, blast occurred about 8:25 local time. The little red X that you see there is the actual place where it detonated. Don't really want to go over the too much of the stuff that's in there, but up in this corner here is the German embassy. That's the one that they were targeting. And the building here was pretty much completely destroyed, along with everything up and down that road. The bad thing about this is this road in the morning is a pretty major thoroughfare for foot traffic and vehicle traffic coming in and around what they call the international zone, the IZ, the green zone. That's why it caused so many casualties, is because there were so many people on foot in the area, and there was a lot of vehicles that transfer coming to and from work in the surrounding areas. The initial blast was, when they first reported it, they said it was only 50 wounded, or 50 killed and 50 wounded, and that number immediately rose. At the end, it was 150 killed and 400 plus wounded. And based off the amount of civilian casualties, nobody claimed responsibility for the incident. So usually, pretty quickly, somebody will take responsibility for it, whether it be Taliban, ISIS, Haqqani. But this one, nobody claimed responsibility because it definitely killed way more civilians than they wanted to. And based off estimates, it was about 3,000 to 9,000 pounds of explosive weight. And our camp is not too far from here. And we definitely, it shook my bed. It moved my bed about 8 inches from the wall when it went off. So it was a pretty good explosion. It's a hell of a wake-up call in the morning. So this is the video of the actual incident. Like I was saying, where that red X was is about the center of this intersection here. And then the camera is actually inside that German embassy, inside that walled-in compound in that building that was destroyed. Like I said, you can see a lot of the traffic, a lot of the foot traffic coming through here. Coming from left to right, you're going to start seeing the red tanker coming into play. That is the sewer trucks that they use around the city. And the terrorists figured out that they could try to sneak one in on us. And you'll see what happens here in a second. So the security guard was questioning him, and as soon as he questioned him, they went ahead and detonated, and this is the aftermath. So as you can see, it was a pretty significant device. I mean, when it went off, it put off a pretty damn good shockwave, and from here you're looking basically out into the street, and you turn that normal street that you've seen in the initial portion of the video into, when we got there, it looked like Armageddon. So the initial response, the outer cordon was handled by the local police and military. They showed up pretty damn quick. They locked down the outside, and they started treating everything that was on the outside. Immediately after this, we started our response. Initial response was about 7 paramedics and advanced EMTs. And based off of the enemy tactics and procedures in the area, we decided that we're only going to do crash triage based off of, potential threats that could be follow-on. And this is where I'm trying to tie it into everybody's current situation, is that terrorism doesn't really have borders. And it's more to open people's eyes into how fast something can go really, really bad. Nobody was ever thinking about that, in that morning we're going to have a, 9,000-pound car bomb go off outside. And think about your area. What would you do in the situation? What kind of resources do you have to bring to bear? And how are you going to think about the chaos that is going to ensue after one of these things go off? Leonard Bernstein said, to achieve great things, 2 things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. And that's the biggest thing, is we had thought about this stuff. We had plans in place, and everything went pretty well. Obviously, there's going to be hiccups along the way, and that's the best thing we can do, is take from what we've learned and apply them going forward. And the best thing that we use is the 7 Ps, is proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. And that's the best thing, is you have to have the prior planning in place, because when it all goes down, you're not going to have enough time to think about a plan. You just got to react to the plan and keep going forward. So I'm not sure if I was supposed to say our casualty count. So the only ones that I put down here was the patients that I actually either treated or helped treat. And so there were more casualties in this, but I'm going to leave that out because I'm not sure if that was supposed to be released or not. So basically, we use start triage, simple triage and rapid treatment. It's quick and down and dirty. You're looking for the walking wounded. Best thing we do for that is start calling for people. If you can hear my voice, move to me. That gets everybody out of the way. It's quickly sorts who's really injured and who's not. In these situations, move quickly and accurately. And then with this, our team was comprised of, about 7 medics, and then everybody else had at least TCCC provider or greater. So it was a huge benefit to have everybody on board with TCCC and basic medical training. So at this point, the bomb had just went off. We were moving to the point of injury. And using TCCC, we're still under care and fire phase based off of the enemy TTPs and the proximity of the blast. So with that, we are doing M&A only, and that's what we'll get into next. I don't know how many people have TCCC backgrounds or understand what TCCC means. It's Tactical Combat Casualty Care. It's the main thing we use over here because it was proven through Ranger Battalion that the leading cause of preventable death in the battlefield, massive hemorrhage and tension pneumothorax, and that's quickly addressed in March. So the March algorithm is massive bleeding, airway, respiration, circulation, hypothermia, head injury. And the basis of it is that as you go down your algorithm, you're checking off all of them preventable causes of death on the battlefield. So with massive bleeding, tourniquets, quickly, high and tight, moving on. Airway, is the airway open? Not open it. If they're still not breathing, they have no pulse after that, they're considered black in care under fire. So our first patient, he was walking up the street towards our camp. He was found, he was walking coherent middle-aged male. He was found to have a depressed skull fracture, and then he had massive lacerations of the left hand or left forearm and near complete avulsion of the left hand. He had moderate bleeding at the time. When we found him on the street, he was loaded on a Talon stretcher and brought inside the wall. Once we were inside the walls, the tourniquet was placed high and tight, got good bleeding control. We made a cravat donut, which basically all you do is you take a triangle bandage, wrap it around itself to make a donut to protect depressed skull fracture. That was placed over the wound, and then it was quickly wrapped up. And then he was brought to our clinic, which is manned by 2 PAs. And then we had another, massive contingent of medics waiting for them. This guy was one of our first patients evacuated. He went up to the local military hospital, which has a neurosurgeon on staff. And from what I heard going forward, he made a pretty good recovery. This guy was a local, and he made a pretty good recovery and was released from the local military hospital. So the second patient we found was, he was out on the street in the back of a pickup truck in a little Hilux. And when I got to him, obviously we don't speak Dari or Pashtun, the local languages, but he was holding his lower left chest, and he had a lot more difficulty breathing. His work of breathing was real high. So cut and exposed, found a large section of fractured ribs on the left side. He didn't have very much paradoxal movement, but I mean, it definitely was a massive section of his broken ribs. From what we found out from our interpreter, he was thrown into one of our T-walls, big cement walls. When the blast went off, he was picked up and threw into the T-wall. And I'm assuming that's where he broke his ribs. When I found him, he was stable. He had equal bilateral breath sounds, and based off our current situation, I put him in, gave him to one of the other guys. He was a TCCC provider. He was brought back to the clinic, and this guy was also evacuated to a local military hospital. We couldn't find out what happened to this guy after he was flown up to the hospital. And like I said, there was no treatments done for this guy because he was breathing and he had no massive hemorrhage. So no treatments were done for this guy in the field. And he was walking when I seen him last. So that was the last time I seen him. The third patient we found, he was found unconscious, unresponsive. And this guy was actually really close to the blast. He had no obvious external injuries. I don't know why he keeps jumping back and forth. But this guy was, I'm just going to let it roll. He was in direct line of sight of the actual explosion. He had a massive, this guy didn't have massive anything. This is the next guy. He was unconscious, unresponsive. He was drug out of the line of sight of the actual explosion because the breach in the wall was right in front of where he was. He was breathing, and he had no major hemorrhage, so we got this guy onto the stretcher, back to the clinic, and that's the last time I seen this guy. The biggest thing for this, the biggest takeaway point for this one for everybody is understanding. I mean, we always say scene safety, and that was our biggest thing with this one is he was in direct line of sight of the actual blast. We had no security in front of us. And our quickest treatments on the battlefield is what we call superior firepower. And without being able to effectively call the site secure, we had to move this guy out of the line of fire, but there was no actually fire, but we just wanted to make sure that we were in a secure area. And that's our version of scene safety here, is moving patients if they need to be, to ensure that you have a secure area to work on the patient if need be. And like I said, this was inside the wall. We figured out that the blast had taken out a section of our wall, and we needed to set security. Once we had site security, we felt pretty comfortable with our security posture, and we moved out of the care under fire phase. In tactical combat casualty care, there's 3 distinct phases. Care under fire is when you're in direct threat. There's something around you that could kill you. And with that, like I said, we're only doing the massive hemorrhage and airway. After that, we have tactical field care. Tactical field care is where we're going to get into a lot more of our in-depth treatments if need be. And then the tactical evacuation phase. And that's kind of, these things are kind of going on simultaneously based off our circumstance. We had a nice secure compound to work out of on one side, and on the other side we had the breach plugged, and we had enough people over there we felt relatively comfortable to move out of the care under fire into the tactical field care. The 4th patient that I found was, I don't know why he keeps doing that. He was a local, or not a local, he was a TCN. He was up in the guard tower, and he had tissue damage to the left leg or the right calf. And so he was up in the guard tower that was over the wall. The blast had hit him, and he had taken a piece of shrapnel to the right leg. Once he had found out that he had massive damage to that right leg, he went ahead and self-applied a tourniquet. The tourniquet was placed incorrectly, but it controlled the bleeding until we got there. So he probably had the tourniquet on for 10 minutes before we got to him. And with that, the tourniquet was placed incorrectly. Once we got to him, we had placed another tourniquet higher and a little bit more securely, got him out of the tower, and got him evacuated back to the clinic. Well, once he was back to the clinic, he was placed in care of our local PA, or our PAs that are on staff. And this guy made a full recovery, and he's back at work today. The biggest one that I'm trying to get, but it's kind of being cattywampus right now. Let's see if we can do that. There we go. Is the 5th and 6th patient that I found were actually sitting down. They were a canine and a canine handler. They were sitting down in a guard booth, and the canine handler self-reported that he lost consciousness. When I asked him the series of questions, his A&O questions, he was sluggish. Took him 10, 15 seconds to answer any question I asked him, like what day it was, where he was, what he did, who he was. And then for all these patients, the first thing I asked him is I give him three words to remember. And the words that I always choose are apple, table, and penny. When I first encountered him, I realized he had the 1,000-yard stare going on. And that's when I realized that he's probably pretty good suspect for a TBI. Asked him remember apple, table, penny. Went through the A&O questions. He was real sluggish with his response on the A&O questions, and it only took probably a minute for this. Asked him to repeat the 3 words back to me, and he completely forgot that I told him what 3 words, or that I gave him 3 words. So obviously he needed to go out for a CAT scan. And the one that was taken by surprise is when I looked down at his dog. His dog also had the 1,000-yard stare. And that was unbeknownst to me, is that, who knows when you're going to have to treat a dog. And I mean, we work with, police officers and canine, Is the great thing is that we had received a canine kind of TCCC class probably 3 weeks prior to this. And so the first thing I asked is, where is your muzzle? Because canines get real protective of their handler. And I wanted to keep this guy in the game a little bit longer. Asked him to muzzle his dog. And once we got his dog muzzled, we got them both out of there as soon as possible. They both went up. They both got CAT scans, and they both actually went home. I'm not sure if they're back to work today. So this guy was unconscious. He states that he was unconscious for an unknown period of time. He said he woke up. He was nauseous. He had a massive headache, obviously, because he was pretty close to the blast. And the canine he was definitely out of the fight. So with this, the biggest takeaway points that we used is what lessons did we learn from this? And we had a plan. We trained our plan, and we train how we fight. But the biggest thing we learned is be flexible, because, you know, no plan is 100% perfect. And as with, you know, civilian EMS, our interagency communication broke down really, really fast. And with all of our comm equipment and everything that we trained for, it was really unique to see how fast we couldn't talk to either A, our outside agencies, or B, supporting agencies, because they were jumping around on their communications frequencies, or they were using crypto that we didn't have. So their radios were scrambled and we couldn't actually directly talk to them. And that was a huge takeaway point for us, is to have a dedicated channel specifically for these mass casualties incidents, where all the agencies can come onto the same frequency, and now we all can talk, share information, figure out what's going on, and develop your situational awareness, you know, a little faster. And like I said before, when you're doing the beginning half of your triage, you're asking for people that can hear your voice to move to you. However, if you don't speak the local language, they're going to look at you like you're crazy. So the biggest thing we have to take away from that is have interpreters if you need them, or, I mean, biggest thing, use hand arm signals, use something. But obviously it's better if you have the local language. And we also started learning the phrases, hey, come to me, come to me. For the line that says one triage location, this was meant to be a little bit more applicable to us, is because since the point of injury and our clinic were pretty close to each other, everybody's initial response was send everybody to the clinic right away. And I mean, that can really tax your clinic really, really fast, overload them with a lot of patients that they don't need to be overloaded with right away. So with having one triage location at the point of injury, having a medical incident commander there that has communication back to the clinic, we can kind of control the flow of patients to the clinics. And on the civilian side, taking away lessons learned from this one is having that medical incident commander being in charge, where they're not overloading local hospitals. They're divvying up the patient load to different hospitals, so you're not overloading one hospital with all the patients. And that was the main thing that we took away, is quickly establishing a triage location, having a medical incident commander take charge of that location, and be in communication with our clinic to accept patients as we find them based off their category, whether they're urgent surgical, they're delayed, or they're just a regular green where they're walking wounded, and we can definitely take care of them at the actual triage location based off our current capabilities. Triage cards are huge. With the amount of wounded that we had and tracking them, our plan is to have the medic who takes charge of the patient, starts treatment on that patient, stay with that patient from point of injury all the way through evacuation. However, you know, being taxed with, you know, a mass amount of casualties, that medic couldn't continue care all the way through. So we had to give patient care, like handoffs all the way through. So with the triage cards, it allows us to keep track of vitals, what we've done, any medications we give, how much ketamine is the guy have on board, did he have any ANSEF, antibiotics given to him in the field so he's not getting doubled up once he gets to the clinic. And then making sure that we have a good accountability on that, and that gets rubber banded to the guy and goes with him everywhere. It also helps once he gets evacuated out to the local military hospital, they know exactly what's been done. And with that, we use what's called the MIS report when we're handing it off. It's mechanism of injury, signs and symptoms, and treatments. And that's all we're giving. Basically, every time we're giving this patient off, it's just a quick down and dirty handoff. And combined triage cards with the MIS report, and usually we were able to hand off good patient care, and continuation of patient care was established all the way through the chain from point of injury to the clinic to actual evacuation. Following the CCC guidelines, too many people were starting to get sucked into moving into patient care versus understanding where we were, what was going on, and potential threats in the area. So during the care under fire, all we're doing is M&A only. So we're taking care of that massive hemorrhage, and we're opening the airway so we have a good airway while we're getting that guy back into a secure compound. And it was hard to break people of the habit of going directly into full patient care, doing the full assessment. And with that, we trained on this a lot more post-incident. And the last one is just breathe. It's going to be a chaotic situation. Take a step back, breathe, relax, especially for the medics that were there. So we had 7 medics and we probably had 50 people on the ground. They're all looking to you for what to do. And with that, I mean, you have to have that calm, cool demeanor. So take a step back, breathe, take in the full situation, and make your decisions there. Be decisive with your treatments and your when you're doing your triage. Be quick and dirty with it, but make sure you're being accurate. And once we're established into our triage location, go back and re-triage everybody. Make sure everything was done correctly. Is anybody deteriorating? Is anybody improving? And you can also, upgrade or downgrade people as need be from that point. So that was the main lessons learned from the entire incident. It was a crappy situation because of, definitely people got injured, people got killed, but we take everything that happens as a learning event. And this is a massive learning event for us. And it's not a normal situation that you'll encounter on the civilian side back in the United States. And this was my biggest thing is this information needs to be shared with everybody, because you're not going to see this normally, but it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I mean, if you look at, the Oklahoma City bombing, the World Trade Center 1 and 2, you had a massive amount of casualties. And you're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to have these taxations on the local hospitals. You're going to have the taxation on your resources. And if you think about your plans beforehand, talking with people and getting a good plan established, it'll be a lot easier to implement the plan and go off of what you have established versus making it up as you go. These 2 pictures are the actual place where the tanker went off. It gives you kind of a size reference how deep that crater is. The 2 guys down there are doing post-blast analysis. They're trying to find different parts of the actual device to see if we can figure out who was the one that did it based off of construction of the device. And you can see the damage to the surrounding buildings. And like I said, when we came up off to the left picture, you see where the concrete walls are tipped over. That's where we came from. And when we looked over the actual wall, it looked like Armageddon. Everything was covered in dust. Everything was on fire. It looked like, I don't know, it was the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. And I've, like Jane had said, I've been in the military for 10 years and did multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. And this was by far the craziest thing I've done so far. This is the local response. These pictures were taken from local media. This was pretty much right after the blast. And you can see that it was pure chaos on the outside. Everybody was running around, and with all the agencies of the Afghan government trying to get in there. It wasn't a secure location for, you know, the initial 20 minutes that post-blast. So trying to make it more applicable to street medicine back in the US, terrorism worldwide. The people that think that we're sheltered because we're in the US, they're naive, because they're definitely trying to hit us on the homeland. This is one thing that we have to constantly be vigilant of, is to think and prepare. What are we going to do in situations like this? Biggest thing, there will be chaos. Understand it, know it, prepare for it. But like I said, your plan will only make it so far. You're going to have little to no advance warning. Obviously, they're not going to text you the night before and be like, hey, we're going to blow you up in the morning. So this is where having that proper planning in place and thinking about a plan and questioning your local response plans and preparing that way is probably one of the best ways that I think that anybody can be prepared for anything like this. Because obviously you're never going to have enough training or enough preparation, but the preparation you'll have will be a lot more than nothing. And that is about it. If I have any questions, I'll be happy to field questions.
So I have a question. So what type of, I have a question, is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
So what type of, I guess beyond the blast, what type of facilities did you have there to be able to facilitate all of those individuals? Like, were there makeshift, I guess, trauma centers created? Because, I mean, 150 people, as far as death, I guess the dead people aren't the issue. It's more or less the 400 injured. That can overwhelm, I think, even the most prepared facilities. So what did you all do to compensate for those high numbers? Or what did they do to compensate for those high numbers?
So surrounding the area that was actually attacked, there's 4 local hospitals that are considered emergency facilities. They'll, on the grand scheme of thing, they're probably like a level 3, level 4 trauma center, unfortunately, but that's the local populace. They don't have a lot of access to, you know, good trauma centers. There's one emergency facility that was probably equivalent to our level 2, and they received a lot of the worst injured patients. With that, the embassy was trying to coordinate with the further surrounding hospitals to try to get these guys a little bit further out. Obviously, like you're saying, 400 plus wounded is definitely going to overwhelm any facility. And so unfortunately, they don't have a good set plan in place. So they'll jump into taxi cabs. They'll get, like you've seen, they're getting put into the back of pickup trucks, drove to the hospital. So they were definitely quickly overwhelmed. And with our current situation and the way that we interact with the local governments, we don't provide any assistance to them unless they request it. And they never requested any help on that aspect. So basically anything inside of our area, we were responsible for. Anything outside of them walls, they were responsible for. So,
all right. I guess so. I have one more question.
I have some.
Go ahead. I'll wait.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So my question is, so of the 150 people who died, 150 plus, what percentage would you guess, and I'm not holding you to this, I mean, just generally speaking, just ballpark figure, how many of those deaths occurred from the actual incident versus the care or lack thereof after the incident?
Initial reportings immediately or post-blast were about 80 dead. And that was coming from the Ministry of Health. So with 80 dead right after the blast, you can, speculate how many of them died because of lack of care or lack of, professional care.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know. The video may not be good.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. If you can hear me okay, then I'm just having some problems on my end. My question, or I guess my observation would be for our students here is in relation to, most of us don't work in a large city area. Many of us out in the counties and in the smaller cities where there are not that many facilities to deal with. You're lucky to get a level 1 or a level 2 trauma center within a 50-mile radius of you, and the rest may be doctor's offices and a few standing minor emergency centers. So in thinking in terms of what you just saw in these pictures that Jeff showed us from Afghanistan and some of the other pictures that you imagine something like in your community, the number one, instead of having 7 AEMTs and paramedics on scene triaging, you'd be like 2 or 3, and maybe only one of those is a paramedic, if that. And so the overwhelming nature of an incident and how it would affect our very sheltered is a good word to use, communities and services and stuff here, it's something you have to get your mindset, because yes, it can happen, but the resources are going to be very difficult to find and allocate. And so, like you said, the emergency response team, figuring out who your backup to the backup to the backup to the backup plans are and where these people are going to go ahead of time goes a long way. I think the biggest thing I ever worked was one of the Delta plane crashes back in the 80s. And oh my gosh, the news said it was wonderful. It was so wonderful how everything worked together. So if I was there, it was mass confusion. And it's just, I can't imagine having to be one of those 7 medics and EMTs looking at. I think me personally, the only one I commander on was a 17, and it was confusing enough. So one that is coming into EMS and start thinking bigger, because what you're seeing there that far away from the interior, if they get it.
I think he cut out there.
There, James?
I think
there you go.
Yeah, I think that was, there we go. That was all I had to say, was just pointing out that people think bigger here. All of our paramedic students need to start thinking bigger.
Yeah, that was my biggest reason that I wanted to go ahead and share this information, is that you can quickly be overwhelmed in having the forethought of thinking about what would happen in these situations. Because, I mean, if you look at, was it most recently the shooting down in San Antonio? How quickly did that overwhelm that situation? I mean, you have SAMC right there. You have, Maine Methodist, that's the level 1 trauma center. But, I mean, how far away is that, and how much resources do you have to get them there? And with that, like Jane was saying, it's going to be chaos, and you're going to quickly be overwhelmed. And they're having limited response. I mean, we had a pretty good response because we had a lot of TCCC providers, which, I mean, are they're more trained in trauma than your average first responder. But moving on into the post-blast injuries, we're looking at bariotrauma of the lungs. What else do we have to worry about here? And having the forethought of everything going into it, and like Jane said, being sheltered in the U.S., it's a horrible thing to think about, this happening back there, but it definitely does have the possibility of happening. And unfortunately, this wasn't the only incident that we've had in the past year. We had one go off a week ago that was actually an ambulance that was filled with 750 pounds of TNT. They tried getting into a checkpoint, detonated another really busy intersection. It was another 98 killed, plus another 150 plus wounded. So over here, it's applicable to us because it happens quite frequently, but it doesn't mean it can't happen anywhere.
How far away was that from you, or did you get the opportunity to get involved in that at all as far as patient care?
No, we were actually sitting from line of sight from the detonation was about a mile from where we were at. And it was definitely startling because we were sitting in the truck, like just having a good old conversation. Doors were open. That thing went off. And we closed them things pretty quick.
All right. It's kind of the way we treat a thunderstorm around here, you know? We have to get everything inside.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Jacob, Brian, Daniel, and you guys out there got any with Jeff?
Oh, yeah, I got a question.
yeah, go ahead.
So I know you mentioned, or what Jane was mentioning about working out in the counties. That's where I run EMS, is out in a county of about 10,000 people. Since it's a predominantly volunteer fire department, so it's real hit or miss based on if we're going to get additional resources as far as, you know, an extra set of hands or really just someone to pump chest. But what would you say would be the best route to take as far as coming up on, say, like a multiple car MVC or something where we have more than a couple patients, where it's just a paramedic and a basic partner to kind of mitigate the situation?
For me, that's the paramedic's going to take charge, or whoever has the highest level of training is going to take charge of triage. They're going to take the most critical patients, obviously, and then you're going to start downgrading patients and assigning patients to other providers, whether it be your EMT, a bystander if you need to. I mean, grab anybody and get them involved. And that's exactly what happened here is, I mean, we got taxed out, so we started using the people that we had, and thank God we have enough medical training that they're competent in taking care of, you know, minor trauma. But like you're saying, you're rolling up onto a multiple car MVC where you have, you know, 5, 6, 7 patients. You just got to do that crash triage real fast, come through, figure out who's the most critical, and make your list going down from there.
Okay, appreciate it.
The graded for the greatest number. And I will point out something. I have found there's a teaching drill to be a part of at the local certification.
Hey, Jane, you're going in and out. It's hard for
Triage.
us to you're breaking up really bad.
Okay. How about now? Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, that's better.
I was saying that sometimes the lowest level person makes a better triage because I overthink everyone. Sometimes the EMT triage officer in delegating and tagging and deciding who gets what, moving on, and allow and handle treatment sections of it. And he is triaging, but it's just something that I noticed in training a paramedic against an EMT. Both of them with the an EMT and run circles around the paramedic every time.
I think that's because paramedics sometimes forget about BLS. They go straight to ALS and they overwhelm themselves. From what I've seen, they overwhelm themselves and they're trying to intubate 5 people, and it's like, look, only one person needs to be intubated, the other person needs a nasal cannula, the 3 other people need non-rebreathers. So, you know what I mean? So I think that partly plays a part.
And of course, if the answer's enough, you're not even at that point. You're at the point of this one gets the airway propped open. If they breathe, they breathe. If they don't, they're black tagged, you move on.
Yeah,
exactly. And that's the hardest thing for a paramedic to grasp.
Yeah.
So don't forget your BLS. Learn your triage algorithms and know them by heart and go by them, because those triage algorithms are simple, they're easy to remember, and that's what you need when you're under stress like that. And that's what will save you from, because if you're over treating this one, next patient 3 down is dying because you could have done something as simple as having a bystander put their hand over a wound for pressure, or propping the airway open so they can breathe.
Very true. I think that's part of the.
All right, anybody else?
I think that's part of the affinity of paramedicine, is being able to intervene with that cycle of death. You know, so the fact that we can usually find a way to save people or bring them back, I think that's kind of, like you said, that can be counterproductive when it comes to triage. You get zoned in on one patient, and thinking, we've all probably been guilty of that at some point.
Well, actually, I mentioned I worked a 17-car pileup on the interstate, and that's not near to the volume of what you see in Afghanistan. But I was a brand new medic working with a supervisor, and we got on scene. The supervisor went straight to the guy who was ejected through the windshield of the 18-wheeler and was laying on the pavement, while I had the others, which had anywhere from 1 to 4 people. And it ended up being a double helicopter response and about 10 ambulances. And he was the supervisor. He was supposed to be incident command for medical incident command, and we were working with volunteer fire departments. So there was no fire incident command that actually came out. It was us out there. And sometimes the more education you get, the more you over the least experience sometimes is the one who's able to stick with the algorithm.
More education sometimes makes less common sense.
Exactly. And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to point out with that. Whenever you asked that question, I believe that was Daniel maybe, or Brian. But the more patients you have, if you've got more patients than you can handle and it's there, then do the greatest good for the greatest number. And sometimes that doesn't mean the best care you can give. It means giving the minimal care to give until you get help.
Yeah, and with that, Jane had mentioned the incident commander. We actually have dedicated incident commanders that are tasked out on our load plans whenever we go out. And so luckily we have that in place, and it took a little longer than we wanted to get up and running, but once it was up and running, it definitely smoothed everything out. And our triage, like I said, is like they're saying, it was quick, down, and dirty. We're looking at it and moving on if need be. But having the algorithm memorized and sticking to your treatment protocols based on the algorithm and moving as quickly as you can to get, like Jane's saying, the greatest good for the greatest number is the only thing that's going to keep everybody moving and not zeroed in on one patient. Because obviously, I mean, if we would have got zeroed in on one patient, that depressed skull fracture with the avulsion and the massive injuries to the left arm, everybody's going to get sucked in on that one right away because it was really obvious. You walked up and I mean, you could see it plain as day that he had a massive depressed skull fracture. I was actually quite surprised that he was still walking and talking to us.
Wow.
The adrenaline helps you do a lot.
Else out there?
You get in trouble.
Jeffrey, I had a question. So on the topic of just the massive logistical effort that it takes to organize something like this, what kind of communications did you guys have in place? Did you have radios to use? And you mentioned interagency communication was an issue as well. How did you organize that?
Second, because I have to try to figure out what I can and cannot say based off of our classification. What's classified and what's not. All right, so we do have team radios that can communicate inter-team. So basically there's 770 megahertz, so it's a trunk system. The same thing that you're using back in the States. And we can communicate back to the embassy, which is the massive operations center, obviously, and they're controlling a lot of the flow of traffic. We do have other radio communication equipment that's available to us to talk to the outside agencies. And that's where I said that the massive communication broke down is as soon as this thing went off, everybody went to secure comm. Nobody was on the same frequency. Nobody was on the same crypto. And with crypto, there's really intense nuances about time and radios and fills and all sorts of other stuff. So with that being said, it broke down really fast because everybody wanted to keep everything secret. Like they were trying to hide the fact that a giant bomb didn't just go off.
Oh my goodness.
that's, I mean, we had a lot of communication equipment available to us. It's just the fact that everybody switched to other communication equipment versus the one that we all know works.
Brian, that's why it's so important in the area and locations that you work that you all are bought into the area-wide incident command plan. What's going to happen in the mass casualty, because those plans delineate who's going to be in charge of what departments, what radio frequencies will be used, services, whether it's law enforcement, fire, EMS, utility company, whoever's coming. That all ties in also that NIMS section of courses that you have already taken and how those pieces all fit together, but that should be outlined in the community and area incident command plan that you will have in your area.
This actually brings up another great point. Jane illustrated being part of the NIMS plan. And we're so reliant on our cell phones these days that that's how a vast majority of the communication is done via cell phone. However, as soon as that incident went off, the cell phone towers were, well, unfortunately, right behind that blast was actually one of the cell towers. So that thing got taken out. On top of that, as soon as it went off, everybody in the city is trying to call everybody else in the city to find out if they're okay or not. So immediately the cell network got overwhelmed and we couldn't use cell network anymore. So that's another huge takeaway point is you might not have cell phones. What are we going to do after that?
Hurricane Katrina effect.
I'm going to mention one other thing out there for you guys that are here. If you go online and if you'll email me to remind me, I'll look it up if you can't find it. But the Centers for Domestic Preparedness has some wonderful training. And one of the classes that they offer is an incident command course, where it's incident command course. And I actually took it in Anniston, Alabama at the old base there. It was amazing. We had from all over the United States in our group. We had firefighters, we had nurses, we had doctors, we had people from the electrical company, the water company, and they all came to this class. And we had to decide who was going to be the incident action, and we had our own little incident command center, and then we had everyone else over at another video footage of how things were developing. We had to decide what to do and how to manage our situation. And that program is free, and they offered tons. I took there where we played with sarin and VX gas. It was fun. And it's all free training. They will even pay airfare. They put you up while you feed you, and you take this, and then they send you home when it's all said and done. If you can't find it, let me know. Shoot me an email. I'll get you but I do highly recommend training in that particular course is excellent.
Where's this located at, Jane?
Well, they do train for other programs to teach some other courses across the United States, but they run a center that's based in Anniston, Alabama at the old Army base there. The Centers for Domestic Preparedness took it over. So it's Centers for Domestic Preparedness, Emergency First Responder Training, I believe, is how you can look it up online. But I'll look it up, and if I don't remember to post it, I'll try to find the info for you. I've been about 4 or 5 different times in the last 15 years and took different courses every time, and it's just amazing. And it's all paid for with U.S. tax dollars.
Nice.
Unless Trump took it away, but I doubt it. He took this one away. Anything else, guys, or we got it tonight? Jeff, that was amazing. Thank you so much for offering to do this. And we appreciate you, and we hope you stay safe. We want to see you. I hope maybe I'll meet you when you're coming back over here for skills labs. I'm kind of in and out of Texas myself, but I'd love to meet you in person and maybe take you to lunch.
Oh, well, I should be back there coming March or April, and that's when I'm probably looking at doing the skills. So.
I'll be in Texas in March.
All right. Well, there, it might work out.
All right. All right, guys and girls. Jeff, since you've got you have to do to end the meeting is click the X and say end meeting for all, and then it'll automatically save to the cloud for me to extract. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thank you so
Be
much.
safe,
Good night.
man.
Thank you, Jeff.
Will do.
All right.
Thanks.
All right.